Hi, and welcome back to David Pattinson's Accused Friends. You were all probably as stunned as I was looking at the Black Lives Matter protests in Hyde Park yesterday and just the total mass of people and all the lack of social distancing. And I totally stand up for every British citizen's right to protest, and I've been encouraging protests against the lockdown throughout this lockdown period. But it's amazing to see how the police treat the Black Lives Matter people so differently to the anti-lockdown people. And there was an article in yesterday's Guardian saying how the Met feared serious disorder if lockdown rules were enforced. So they just didn't bother enforcing them. And not only did they not enforce them on the ground, all the media and political classes were out there saying how they love all these Black Lives Matter protest people, and there were MPs saying, hey, like I had to break lockdown to join the Black Lives Matter protests, which by that point had spread over to Westminster. And how foolish I feel really having looked at that, because I've stood up for, a lawful approach to ending the lockdown by prosecuting the government, by taking them to court, whereas all we needed to do was just join Black Lives Matter, and they have driven a tank through all the rules, all the social distancing rules, all the rules about barbecues, about overnight stays, about football matches, about everything. Because if they're going to go down there to London in the tens of thousands, stand as close as they want to each other, spread the virus with impunity, then why can't you and I do it? Why is it one rule for Black Lives Matter and one rule for everyone else? And it's ironic that they're protesting against racism. And when I was growing up at school, I was taught that racism is where you treat, one race differently to another race. And I totally stand up for the fact that British police bear no responsibility or any accountability for police actions in a foreign country, like I've said before. But the big crime of the British police is discrimination. It's discriminating against one group of people, which is the people that are obeying lockdown and, dare to stick their head above the parapet to dissent about it. They get arrested immediately. Or the Black Lives Matter people that can break the lockdown rules, that can break the social distancing rules with absolute impunity. Isn't it racism to treat, black people differently if they're breaking all the social distancing rules compared to whites or other minorities who are obeying them and who dare to speak out against them? And Boris Johnson was coming out yesterday saying, oh yeah, he loves, Black Lives Matter, of course they matter, and all this stuff, but never says British Lives Matter. And then he is also saying that the Black Lives Matter totally have the right to protest as long as they're keeping social distance, but yet never says that about the anti-lockdown protests. And all these MPs have, put in these rules about how their protests are banned and not allowed. And yet, when Black Lives Matter do it, it's not a problem. So I think it's a total disgrace. It's a total double standard. Then to add insult to injury, you got the police kneeling in front of the Black Lives Matter mob to show solidarity with them. Everyone's desperate to say how peaceful the protests are. Why don't we just assume it's peaceful? Why do we have to constantly be told it's peaceful? Is it maybe to do with the fact that a lot of these Black Lives Matter people are looting and rioting in the United States, setting fire to buildings, setting fire to cars, beating up people in the streets and leaving them for dead, shooting people? How is that peaceful? So maybe, we should assess the peacefulness and take it with a grain of salt if and when it happens. Or will all this violence in the United States that we're seeing on TV now spread to London? Is that something that anyone's doing anything about? Again, I totally stand up for people's right to protest, but, we do need to draw the line at violence. And the Black Lives Matter group have shown a propensity for violence elsewhere, and it'd be interesting to see if they do that here. Next point is, when can we start living our normal lives again? I mean, if all these Black Lives Matter people are able to congregate by the tens of thousands, why can't we go to football matches? Why can't we go to cricket matches? Why can't we go to have, family parties? Why can't we go to funerals? Why can't we go to the pub with our friends and neighbours? Why is it one rule for these people and, the rest of the British people are not able to, live the lives they want to live? Also, to add even more insult to even more injury, the British media, when it was totally obvious that the government had kind of lost all control of the situation, instead of pointing this out and having lots more photos, they immediately pivot to the Madeline McCann story, which is just a government propaganda tool to distract the public. Everyone with a brain who's looked into the case knows that Madeline McCann is dead. She died in the apartment. The Portuguese police chief who invested it said so, whose name's Amaral. The cadaver dog said so. The criminal profiler said so. Tony Blair knew it on the day and sent his chief communications officer, whose name is Gavin Mitchell, to Portugal to defuse it all. You've got Robert Murat with intelligent connections to MI5, and that's the real story. It's the government cover-up of Madeline McCann. It's the media complicity in the government cover-up of Madeline McCann. It's not the abduction of Madeline McCann. She was never abducted. And so to see all these journalists immediately try to distract attention from the Black Lives Matter total disrespect of all the social distancing rules, all the spreading of the virus and not calling them out on it, to go to Madeline McCann, I think is a total disgrace. All these journalists should be, totally removed from their position, because they're not standing up against the government on behalf of the public. They're standing up against the public in order to deceive and manipulate and distract the public on behalf of the government. We don't need journalists that are government employees, government workers. We need journalists that are independent people. And all these journalists yesterday, totally disgraced themselves. I think there needs to be a public inquiry into all this lockdown nonsense as soon as possible. And two more questions we need to add to the list are, firstly, why do Black Lives Matter protesters get treated differently to everyone else in the country as far as the lockdown rules? And secondly, why does the media and the government use the Madeline McCann story at a time of total national crisis? And can we put an end to that now, please? Let's just declare Madeline McCann dead, and then we can all move on. A lot of points I've made in this video. I hope you like and agree with some of them. Please make any comments. Please subscribe to the channel and go out there and live your lives. I don't think we need to respect any of these lockdown rules anymore. All these government ministers like Cummings and Ferguson and all the rest of them, they haven't shown any respect for the lockdown rules. The Black Lives Matter people don't give a damn about them either. And yet when the Black Lives Matter totally disobey the lockdown rules in the face of the police and in the government, there's absolutely no consequences for them, and even more than that, they're cheered along. So I think the government's lost all control. I think the lockdown's over, and I think it's time to get back to our normal lives. So thanks a lot for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.